We'll be starting the session in just a moment. If you have any connection or technical issues, try refreshing your browser first. If this doesn't work, please go to the Help Desk by clicking Sessions on the left or click the People tab on the right and search Help Desk to send a private message. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, everyone, to the third week of our Menus of Change Leadership Summit virtual series. I'm Cathy Jörin, Senior Director of the School of Graduate and Professional Studies of the IIIA. Launching the virtual edition of what was supposed to be a memorable 3 days together in Hyde Park has been quite the journey. But we have been thrilled with the positive response we have gotten from you, our community, and it's been wonderful to have not only those of you who were originally going to be with us in person come back week after week, and also to welcome a number of you for whom this may be a first glimpse into the Menus of Change initiative. As we adjusted this conference model to a virtual delivery format, we felt strongly that we needed to make it accessible to as many people in the industry as possible. And thanks to our program sponsors, we've been able to bring this virtual series to you tuition-free, and are incredibly grateful for the support of our platinum sponsor, Kellogg's Away from Home, our gold sponsor, Land O'Lakes, our bronze sponsors, Nestle Professional and Oatly, as well as our supporting and corporate sponsors. We hope you'll get a chance to chat with them during the networking breaks and in their expo booths throughout the summit. We have also had to pivot additional business and education models. In the recently formed School of Graduate and Professional Studies, our master's degree in food business was designed as a primarily online program with 3 short residencies. Our first cohort is in their final semester, getting ready to deliver their capstone projects to faculty and guests, now virtually, and they will participate in a virtual graduation ceremony on September 3rd. This group was introduced to those of you who were at Menus of Change in Hyde Park last year. Our second cohort has just completed their summer session virtually instead of at Hyde Park, and part of that curriculum included content from our virtual Global Plant Forward series. We look forward to admitting a third cohort of nearly 60 students this fall, with their orientation gathering in a virtual format instead of at our Copia campus in Napa Valley. We know, as you do, that flexibility is a key to success in our continued path forward, developing future change makers for our industry. Now, before we dive into this week's content, a reminder that you can access all of the presentations and recipes on our website with the email that we sent to registered attendees earlier this week. And we've built an environment on this platform that still helps you connect and network with your peers and industry colleagues as if we were together in Hyde Park. Visit our networking tab for a 4-minute conversation with a fellow attendee. The topic for discussion this week is, have you experienced interruptions in purchasing since the pandemic? You can also visit the Expo tab to meet with our sponsors to hear about new product developments, consumer insights, sustainable operations, or even just to thank them for their support in continuing our work. Additionally, we've built out some polls in the polls feature, which we'll be coming back to throughout today's sessions. In fact, our first poll is up and running, where we are asking you to think about your future customers, today's youngest generations, and what you think will most impact their food choices. We encourage you to participate in as many of these activities as possible in the spirit of community and sharing that is always central to the CIIA conferences. And if you participate each of the 6 weeks, you'll have a chance to win free registration and travel to next year's conference in Hyde Park, New York. Last week, we heard from a wide variety of industry experts, and we talked about pre- and post-COVID trends, the continuity of Plant Forward as a focus, consumer choice psychology, and the importance of practicing and engaging our customers in sustainability and climate change initiatives. For me, a standout from last week was hearing from several presenters that in recent months, consumers seem to have a heightened awareness of social responsibility and an understanding that their personal choices have impacts not only for themselves, but also for their communities and for the environment. And that it is up to all of us to continue to innovate and educate, helping consumers to make good choices. This week, we will take a deeper look at our food supply system, and we will examine the critical shifts in food service hygiene our industry has taken since the start of the pandemic. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome to the stage Michael Kaufman. Michael is the chair of the Business Leadership Council of Menus of Change, a partner of Astor Group, where he works with companies primarily in the restaurant and retail sectors, a CIIA trustee emeritus, and a senior lecturer at the Harvard Business School, where he teaches a course in challenges and opportunities in the restaurant industry. Michael will be talking with Tom Bené, the newly installed president and CEO of the National Restaurant Association. Welcome to the stage, and Tom Bené. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be, to our audience. I'm thrilled to have a conversation with Tom Bené, the CEO of the National Restaurant Association and its educational foundation. Tom, welcome. Without a doubt, this industry is challenged on so many fronts, and Tom is leading the association and foundation's important work on all aspects of industry recovery. He's new to the association and foundation. He officially joined on June 1st. I've had the opportunity to get to know Tom on behalf of the association board. I chaired the search committee that identified Tom as our top choice for the CEO position. His extraordinary experience, intelligence, and leadership will be vital to the future of our industry. I have a number of questions for Tom, but I'd be happy to include questions from the audience. To do that, please submit them to chat. They will be collected and forwarded to me. So let's begin. Tom, you are CEO and chairman of Sysco, the $59 billion distributor. You were president of PepsiCo Food Service before that. Why join the National Restaurant Association and specifically the restaurant industry at this time of crisis?
Michael, thank you. It's great to be here with all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity. It's a very interesting question, but as you can tell by my background and the two roles you referenced, the two companies, the food service industry has been in my blood for a long time. I really enjoy the industry. I love the passion, the entrepreneurial spirit, all the things that really make this industry great. And while it was a unique time to join the association, I feel like it was an opportunity for me to leverage that past background experience, some of those skills that I've developed in those various roles and during my career, to actually help the industry and see if I could bring together some of the things that I've done in my past to support the industry more fully. It's also, for me, if you think about it, I've been on the supplier side, the distributor side, and it's a logical next step to kind of round out that three-legged stool and get to work closely with all the operators who really make this happen, this industry go each and every day.
Well, Cisco at 59 billion, this industry, almost 900 billion was the 2020 forecast. And sadly, it's not going to be there. Well, so actually, let's talk about the industry a bit. What's your assessment from your chair of where it stands, where it's likely to be the next months ahead, maybe even the next year or two ahead?
Well, as you said, I mean, this is a huge industry, close, over $900 billion projected for 2020. Obviously, it's going to be a little less than that given the current environment. We employ over 15 million people in this industry, and so it's still a very important industry. It's the second largest private sector employer, and so there's just so many aspects of this industry that are, I think, critically important to it. In addition, if I think about where we're at right now, we've projected that by the end of the year, there could be about a $240 billion impact to the industry. Right now, we've seen just through the month of June about $145 billion impact. So it's been one of the first, obviously, to close, and it probably will be one of the last to reopen, given the environment we're operating in. Just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Hearing you well.
And so from that standpoint, I think that, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I also continue to be optimistic about the future. What we've got to work through right now is some of the challenges that exist with the closings and reopenings that have been occurring, while we're very focused on making sure that we, create this environment where we're a safe location for people to be able to go out and experience enjoyment with their family and friends. We've got to get this industry back open, and getting them reopened will be a really important part of this industry recovering from the current situation.
For sure. Absolutely. And Tom, it seems understandably that larger restaurant companies appear to be weathering the pandemic better perhaps than independent restaurants. How might we help ensure that the extraordinary vitality of chefs and restaurateurs who are local, who are independent, are preserved through this crisis?
Well, I think your point about large versus smaller, I think there's a couple things happening here. Typically, the larger restaurants seem to be the ones that have a variety of format types. I'd say the biggest differentiation we see in the industry right now is kind of format type. If you were in business and had a delivery business or a to-go business or a drive-through business that was already in place, those restaurants seem to be doing better, whether they were large or small, those folks. Or if you were in certain categories like pizza, where a lot of the business was done on a takeout basis. When you think about those that have struggled, it's been a lot of these, casual dine, more family type restaurants, which in fact, many of those are in fact independents. And so I think we've got to think about the entire spectrum, but clearly from an independent perspective, since so many of these operators are the heart and soul of some of the communities they're part of, we've got to make sure we're doing everything we can to help them get through this time. We're certainly partnering with many of them. We've got a blueprint for success, which is out in front of the government right now here in the U.S., specifically asking for dedicated relief for those smaller restaurant operators. We've got a dedicated request for about $120 billion in support. We are working that hard. We're not sure exactly where that's going to net out, but we are trying to think about all the various ways that those folks can survive and ultimately get back on their feet. As you well know, that the industry is well beyond just the actual restaurant operator itself. We touch the entire supply chain, from that local farmer in that community who might be a supplier to many of those restaurants, to the fact that 95 cents of every dollar goes back into the community. These are generally lower margin businesses. And so between wages to employees, the payment for food and all those products, in addition to just things like taxes and rent, a big part of the money that goes into a restaurant goes back into the communities they serve.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important point. I mean, it's if the average margin on a restaurant is about 5%, 95% going back in, and the economic multiplier for the industry for every dollar spent, is about between 2 and 3 times going back into the community overall.
Yes.
It has massive domino effects if this industry is being hit as hard as it's being hit.
Absolutely. It's such an important part of every community that we all live and work in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and if I could just, as maybe a follow-up to the independent question. So I know, just reading about what's happening in our industry and around our industry, that there's a perception among some that the National Restaurant Association represents large chains and not independent restaurants. So you're new to the association. You came in with an objective view of what's here, what's not here, what do we need to do. What have you found? Is that perception valid?
It's a great question, because when I came in, I probably had just the opposite perception. Now, I say that because when I think about the types of things that we do, I would have thought that a lot of those larger members, larger chains, had a lot of the resources in-house to do some of the things that maybe many of those smaller operators could not. And so I had the assumption that we provided a huge value to the independent operator. As I've gotten in, I've heard some of those same perceptions, and I've tried to think about that in a different way and think about it from each of the members' perspective. The headline, I would say, is that our membership is made up of both independents, small chains, large chains, franchisees. So we've got a very broad range of membership. I think part of that perception might come from the fact that our membership model is that the larger operators tend to be a member of the National Association, while a lot of the smaller members of those independents we talked about might be part of a state association. And so we're kind of an affiliation of the national and the states. And when you think about those together, we really support and serve all members in all shapes and sizes and certainly interests. But I think that perception is out there partly because of the membership model, and partly because I think of when they think about some of the advocacy efforts that we have, where we might focus some of our time and energy historically, might lend itself more to what some would believe is in support of the larger folks. But I don't think you have to look much further than the current advocacy efforts that are out there, and we are clearly focused on the entire industry. One of the things we pride ourselves on is that we are focused on one industry, meaning independents, franchisees, and chains, not just one or the other. And I think anyone who's close to the advocacy efforts that we have out there would see that. And they would see that when we talk to members of Congress, we are always talking about it from an industry perspective, not just one particular segment of the industry.
So you mentioned, Tom, that you had the blueprint, which is about $120 billion program, multi-phase program, I think, or multi-pronged, I should say. What's your crystal ball? Does this have any traction in Congress? It seems like, as we read, there's a difficulty in figuring out what that package overall will be, much less for the restaurant industry.
Yeah, unfortunately, our blueprint actually had about 7 different components to it, because we felt like we couldn't put all of our eggs just in one basket. That was our number one priority for this industry, and something we desperately need. But I think you start to see, and we've all seen, I think, some of the shifting towards more of a second wave of PPP. And as you might recall, the initial PPP was not all that beneficial for restaurants. There were aspects of it that were helpful, but given the fact that there was a fairly short timeline, and that at the time restaurants really didn't have the choice, they were pretty much shut down, there were some concerns. Fortunately, the association, in conjunction with many of its members, worked with the government to get a flexibility act passed that enabled that to shift some and to create some more flexibility in that original PPP. But because I think that the congressmen and women are not looking to create a lot of new programs or single out any specific industry, the higher likelihood we're hearing now is another version of PPP. Having said that, there are some pieces of that we are also very active in. Initially that came out, it was focused on 50% loss of revenue. Back to the conversation we had around the low margin in this industry, if that was to actually go through, 55% of our industry would not qualify. So we've been pushing, lobbying very hard for a 20% loss of revenue, because even at 20%, many of our members are really suffering. So it's things like that that we're trying to augment to the current, what feels to be some current momentum. There was additionally a letter that was sent to a lot of the congressmen and women from various CEOs across the country. We were also part of that letter, and that was asking to expand the size of this next round of PPP and potentially even create more access for more employers, still small businesses, but more who could participate for that same reason, which is we need to make sure we're taking care of the majority of this industry, and certainly anyone who has been adversely affected financially.
Well, we all hope that we'll see success in getting that done. That would be critical, I think, to the future of this industry and all that depend on this industry. So we do, Tom, we have a question from the audience from Todd Tanova, and who's asking you to share some hope. He's saying, how in the new world will a chef, a restaurateur, or a business owner be able to survive when at full, quote, normal capacity it was tough? What might they think about? Lower rent, tax exemptions, lower utility costs? What hope can you give Todd and probably the rest of us?
Well, look, two pieces of that. To me, first and foremost, this is an amazing industry to be part of. So I would say anybody who's still contemplating or wondering if this is a great industry to be part of, I would absolutely say definitely. I mean, you think about the innovation that's come out of this industry, the entrepreneurial spirit, those things that have made it great will help it come out of this, and will make it great once again. The idea that innovation has been a big part of the industry, I would say, just says to me that things will be different. We will innovate, whether that is, different formats or the way those formats actually come to life could be different, and that could affect things like rent, could affect things like how much dine-in space versus takeout and delivery, or versus outside space. I think all of those things will continue to evolve based on the environment we're operating in today, but probably more importantly based on the environment that I know that we're going to be dealing with in the future. I would also just add that anyone who's into the culinary arts and understands and enjoys this aspect of business, I don't believe for a second that certainly the American consumer, but I think this is true around the globe, that consumers go out and enjoy restaurants for the social aspect of it as much as for the dining aspect. It's a break from the day. It's an opportunity to spend quality time with family and friends. It's an experience that you can't get anywhere else. So to me, all those things that have made this industry great, we're going to be there in the future. Surely the models could evolve, and I think everything from we're seeing brands have opportunities of getting to market faster because of things like ghost kitchens. We're going to find that we all will have access to more variety over time because of delivery and takeout. So I think the formats and the models may change, but I have no doubt that this industry will come back very strong and will continue to be an important part of the economy and all of our way we live our lives going forward.
I agree with you, Tom. I've never seen more innovation and entrepreneurial spirit in this industry. It's really extraordinary. Can you spend a minute? We have a question from Lyle Hildat about the future of the foundation and in specifically ProStart.
Well, as you all know, I think the foundation is a terrific organization that really is focused on a couple of different things. So first and foremost, about helping people who have an interest of getting into this industry to facilitate and enable that to happen. And we cast a very broad net in how we think about that. And we have all kinds of programs, from mentorship programs to scholarship programs, et cetera. We're focused on all types of individuals, whether you're coming out of the military or you've had a prior experience in this industry or not. We create all kinds of opportunities there. The partnership programs that take place in ProStart with the educational organizations is also a very important part of what we do. And we see that program only growing in the future. I think what's been very interesting through the pandemic, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Restaurant Employee Relief Fund, which was a huge effort, came out early days in the pandemic. Guy Fieri was very instrumental in putting a face to that initiative. That initiative raised about $25 million, and we handed out about 43,000 different grants from that program in recognition of those restaurant workers who were out of work, but also to reinforce the importance of people wanting to be and needing to be in this industry going forward. So the foundation's a terrific opportunity for us to continue to give back and to create opportunity for folks who want to be in this industry.
It's so important, and the relief fund was just amazing in its initiation and implementation, really extraordinary. Tom, let's focus for a minute about Menus of Change itself. As you know, it seeks to examine how health and environmental sustainability could be impacted by food choices, how operators might address those issues through their menus. What's your sense of how the industry should view those concerns?
Well, I think they're real concerns, and I think that the industry, is trying to do their part. Certainly, we've seen a range of sustainability efforts, including things like more recycled products, reduction in food waste, identifying and implementing ways that we can be more energy efficient. So there are a lot of things that have gone on. Ironically, as we are in the middle of this pandemic, things like packaging have shifted a bit because they've had to move more towards the high quality packaging, and so the single use, which is not necessarily where obviously we had wanted and see things going. Having said that, I think just like anything else, innovation will come around and help us get back to a point where we can still remain focused on those areas. I think one of the things that's great about this industry is we follow the consumer, and the consumer really drives a lot of these sustainability efforts. And I think the more consumers continue to demand changes, whether they be sustainable changes, environmental changes, energy changes, those kind of things will get implemented in this industry. And we certainly believe that it's going to be an important part of the future landscape and what we look like as an industry. But I think that the more we can learn, the more we can partner with folks who have a passion in this area, who understand this area, and bring a common sense approach to it, there's lots of room for continued growth here, and this industry can and should be a leader in that.
It should, and and I guess related to that, I know that there's growing interest among younger generations in sustainability, in food ethics, climate change, and that may well shape how we think about future opportunity for innovation in the industry. And I guess the question is, how is there business risk in not innovating?
Clearly, I mean, innovation, as we've talked, it's been an important part of this industry for so long. And the way people think about this industry, whether it's getting through this rough time we've been in or thinking about ways in the future to attract new consumers or to satisfy the consumer need out there, I firmly believe innovation is going to continue to be a critical part of the industry. And I think these partnerships that we form with, again, educators, with other industries, if we continue to push for those sustainable changes, the industry and those around the industry that support it will come together, and we'll bring those solutions to market.
So as you know, Tom, we polled the audience up on that very question, and we said, what do you think would be the most, which is the most important, would have the most important impact on food choices for the consumer? And so the winner was personal health and nutrition with 20%. Then where food is sourced, 13%, climate change, 12%. But I guess no surprise, the winner was all of the above at 43%. So all of these factors, are likely to play into the future consumer mind. It is a challenge, though, as you think about it, I'm sure, and as I've thought about it, that you've got legacy businesses built on certain consumer models where the offering of those businesses are well understood by consumers. And they've built that up over years, maybe decades, maybe generations almost. And so navigating, at times scale is a friend, and at times scale is a hindrance in terms of figuring out how to address some of these issues. And I'm sure you've seen that in your work at PepsiCo and your work at Cisco as well. And navigating that, I think, is certainly going to be part of the challenge of the future, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's always a challenge when you are large and they're at scale. Having said that, Michael, I think there are great examples of just again, following that consumer and the trends. If you think about in the last year, how many of these very large scale players have introduced plant-based proteins into their menus? That's, to me, is a very specific, good example of folks who maybe have a model or a historical way of doing things being open to consumer and changing or shifting in a way that allow those consumers access to the products that they want and desire. So I think that the industry is nimble enough to be able to do some of those things. I think it becomes a matter of how much of the consumer starts to push the industry that way. And so I really believe this idea of following the consumer will have a big impact. Surely, in some cases, we should lead. And I think there's been some things the industry has done, like Kids Live Well, where there are products that are out there that are, more geared, healthier products for children, and making sure that that is also available on the menu. And I would say that's an example of listening to the consumer, but also leading. So I think it's a balance, but we need to work together. Facts and consumer will definitely drive us in the right direction.
One of the things that we admired about you, Tom, when you chaired the American Beverage Association board and you had to navigate a number of years ago questions around carbonated beverages. And that was a delicate balancing to the point that you just made. And navigating that, I think, was a real breakthrough because you got the cooperation of fierce competitors to go and do something together.
Again, it came back to, if you think about that time, and it was around, calories for sure, and certainly some of the sugar-sweetened beverage challenges that were there. It was about creating the environment where we were listening to the consumer, we were adapting and adjusting appropriately, but acknowledging that, we couldn't make a hard shift overnight. We had to do it over time. And I think getting the industry to come together, again, driven off of consumer need and consumer sentiment is a big way that helped make that happen. And industries do come together and work together. And I believe this one is a great example of where we are and are capable of doing that. And I think we'll continue to do that as we go forward.
I agree with you. So a couple questions perhaps on current and maybe even somewhat sensitive topics, just to explore that, because I suspect some in our audience would like to hear about that. So in light of several diet-related diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular disease being comorbidities for the COVID-19 that we are confronted with, how do you think about the responsibility of the restaurant industry to customers when it comes to providing healthier options? How do you see that coming together?
Well, I could go back to the Kids Live Well example. And so, think about that was all about trying to create products that delivered a combination of, the healthy benefits that are required, but also something that, would have the nutritional requirements, but also the taste requirements that the consumer would have. I think that the fact that started out pretty small with, call it a half a dozen brands or so, and it's grown to now where I think we have somewhere around 42,000 outlets that have the Kids Live Well program out there. To me, it's an example of acknowledging the issue, putting together a program in partnership across the industry, and then having members accelerate and take advantage of those programs and then start to accelerate that in the marketplace. And again, consumer pull will create momentum here. And I think the more we can continue to put these things together, the more consumers actually, respond by, asking for and taking advantage of these products, the more we'll continue to see that grow in the future.
No, I agree with you. And the consumer is king, as always, in any of these businesses. And a question, that's especially relevant at these times, and that is, what are your thoughts on the role of this industry in promoting conversations and actions around ending racism and discrimination?
I personally think every organization has a responsibility here, but specifically this industry, we are already a very diverse industry, both in everything from ownership to certainly the workforce. And I think we have a huge responsibility to reinforce that this industry won't tolerate any type of discrimination, that we need to be proactively out there doing things to create the environment where both consumers who are in this industry and participating in it, as well as all of our members and their employees, that we're being very proactive in addressing any type of inequality that's out there. I would argue that we've got some great programs that are part of the association and we're making available. The Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance, which is a member of the Restaurant Association. That team is working on all types of additional training and certification programs for operators. We have all types of materials that we're putting out now to help operators be as educated as they can, creating the right environment for their own workforces, but also knowing how to deal with and address any issues that might come out of the way they're operating their business with consumers. So I think we have a huge responsibility. I personally recently met with a group of past Black CEOs who are helping me and giving us some guidance on how we might think about and address some of the challenges that exist today and how we create sustainable change, not just short-term change, but true sustainable change for the industry.
That's great, Tom. Well, we really appreciate your efforts on that. So I think we have time for one more question from our audience, if you're up for it. And this is coming from Gaetano Williams, who's asking, for the next round of PPP, are they leaning toward a new round for first-time applications or additional funding for a second round for a company that has already received PPP?
The good news is that we believe it will be for both. There will be a cap of $10 million, I think, on someone who, I think it's $12 million for if you've not had a loan. It's $10 million if you had a prior. So if you had $1 million loan, you could still have $9 million to go and access. So quite a bit of money is still going to be out there, but for both first-time and prior PPP recipients.
Well, that's great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. I have to say, we are all rooting for you and the association and foundation as you navigate these incredibly choppy waters. But knowing that you're in the CEO seat, I'm fully confident. And I think based on our conversation today, I imagine our audience is as well. So thank you so much. We really appreciate all of your efforts and your time with us today.
Thank you, Michael. It's been great to be with you all. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Tom. So that was the CEO of the National Restaurant Association and Educational Foundation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next session, Towards Sustainable Food Systems, What We Are Learning from the Pandemic. Our speaker is Russell Walker, who's an author and the director of experiential learning and analytics and senior lecturer at the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. Russell is also a member of the Menus of Change Scientific and Technical Advisory Council. He will share some framing remarks about sustainability in our food system, and then later today we'll lead a discussion with other experts in our final general session of the day. So Russell, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be with you all. And there's so much about the restaurant and food industry that's worth considering. And we have indeed, as Tom and the previous conversation mentioned, a tremendous lesson to learn from the COVID-19 crisis. And so I'd like to zero in on that. What are we learning from the pandemic? And a few things that I'd like to root ourselves in is, what is the impact of the restaurant and food industry? And if we looked at pre-COVID conditions, we had approximately 1.6 trillion in food service and food preparation. That happens to be on order of 8% of the GDP. On scale of industries, that's only second to retail. Over 12 million people are employed or were employed in the food service and preparation industry. And what I think is really fascinating about the restaurant industry and why there is such room for optimism, and I share Tom's optimism, is that coming out of the last economic crisis, the great crisis of 2009, it was actually food and restaurant industries that brought us a lot of economic growth. And the question I think that we should ask, and I hope I can give you some perspective on, is will that be the same for this crisis? And I specifically think it will be. And one of the reasons I think so is that we have some historical data showing that Americans are moving to spend more on food away from home. That's a statistic gathered by the Bureau of Statistics. And so food away from home spending has been increasing. So if you look at this map, we see that there are regional differences. The percentages are average annual percent changes. That's tremendous if we have growth on the order of 5-6% in these regions. It is also worth noting the regional differences. Here on the West Coast where I live, we seem to spend more money at just about everything. But it's also tied to the fact that we bring a lot of food from other parts of the country. And so I'd like to speak about that today and also examine the food supply and how it is that we have run into some of these crises. This opportunity for growth and recovery owing to food away spending is, I think, very powerful. But the crisis has also showed us a change in taste and an acute movement away from fine dining. Of course, not surprisingly, cruises are having their worst time ever. But there have been absolute successes in grocery delivery, takeout. And it's my belief that some of that's going to stay, right? And so if you're a restaurant and you say, I didn't have a takeout strategy, I didn't have a pickup strategy, and then that's an opportunity that you might want to re-examine and you might look for innovation. And I think the restaurants who are figuring that out, frankly, are going to serve customers that they didn't serve before. And they're going to figure out how to make that work. And I would argue that they would not have a reason to walk away from that new business and those new customers. And so it's going to be very competitive, but I also think there's going to be a great opportunity to capture that type of demand, the demand from pickup and the demand for delivery services. I think also it's time to examine our menus, frankly, and what really struggled for the United States in food delivery was the production of meat and in many ways. And so we learned a lot of things about our meat delivery. Of course, meat delivery is very efficient here in the United States. In some ways, that's a tremendous economic success. But we also have figured out that we do this in a very concentrated way with a very few number of processing plants. And there's some statistics here that I'll leave for you to examine. But this is what we would consider a very high leverage system, a very few number of facilities servicing many, many people. And then when one or many of these facilities goes down, in the case of COVID, they went down for illnesses. Well, there you go. We can't make the supply. And then, of course, there are lots of other pieces to this supply chain that are relevant around transportation. How does the food get to the sources? And then who specifically works in these facilities? And I think this is always important to think about, especially when we have these conversations about equality and fairness. And these jobs are not necessarily favorable ones in the slaughterhouses, but they are important. And if we can't staff those facilities, then everyone downstream, including the restaurateur, is unable to operate. And we should remind ourselves that these jobs are somewhere around the 30th percentile in income. And many of those people are very susceptible to these kind of social and health pandemics. And when they occur, then we have this disruption in the supply chain. And we learn the supply chain doesn't really have a great redundancy built in. You can't get your meat, and your meat's coming from the other side of the continent because a factory's down or because the transportation's not available. In many ways, we haven't built in this flexibility and this innovation. Some restaurants, I think, have figured out that this is a time to innovate. This is a time to bring new menu items and maybe even to de-emphasize meat and look at alternatives. Look at those alternatives that are closer to where you operate because they involve less participation, in fact, bring more variation and diversification into the menu. This reality of the U.S. moving food long distances, I think, is worthy of some consideration. Here's a nice piece of research put together by Megan Konar, and she examined at a county level those counties that are net food importers or exporters. And we can see, not surprisingly, lots of food comes from the Midwest and certain counties on the West Coast and then moves across the continent. And there's economic reasons we do that, climatic reasons that we do that. And I think we've all come to realize that that's not really local and not regional, but that's just the best available in the marketplace. What if we did move to a more local regional model that allowed a restaurateur to buy something in a closer distance, or at least do that on a more regular basis? There'd be a change in how the food supply chain operates, less redundancy on transportation, and in fact, more flexibility, which would be tremendous when we have things like crises and pandemics. The food industry also, I think, could look at the COVID-19 crisis and examine a few of its economic operating norms to see if in fact they are sustainable economically. The notion of relying on one or very few suppliers might also be one that's inappropriate. Suppose your supplier can't operate because their workers are ill or unavailable, or they had some other crisis economically or financially. The move from eating at home to eating away from home and assuming that that begins with a meat-centric meal might be one that's also re-examined. And then frankly, the labor-intensive work in back of house and even front of house. And today when we think about Uber Eats and Instacart and all these other types of delivery systems, they remove a lot of what would be front of house labor, put it on the consumer. Essentially, a waiter or waitress is replaced by an app. I think there are going to be tremendous opportunities there. Also tremendous opportunities in the back of house to bring automation, perhaps even robotics to help control of costs. And this overall reliance on low-cost labor, I think, is a challenge because those individuals are very susceptible to pandemics. And we're going to have to re-examine location and re-examine outsourcing and the use of delivery systems. And I think also beverage revenue reliance. If your industry or your restaurant is dependent on beverages, that's going to have to be something that you give serious consideration to. A little view from Seattle. This is one of our famous restaurants here, Canlis, and I look at their special to pick up restaurant quality food to take home. They sold out in a matter of minutes and had hundreds of people backing up the highway just to pick up takeaway food at a very high price point. And so do we want to really dine in? Can all individuals do that? It may not be appropriate for families and elderly people who would prefer to eat in the comfort of their home. That's an open opportunity for a lot of restaurants to now go into. I think looking at location as a means of marketing, perhaps ghost kitchens have a lesson on this. Maybe what you would spend on rent, you could spend on marketing and access online. And as I mentioned, pre-ordering and automation and more flexible concepts where you feature local items and items that customers might enjoy associated with a specialty in the region. This could also be a tremendous inflection point, and I believe it is. We know that younger generations are much more flexible in their diet and prefer vegetarian dishes at a larger percentage. And even as early as 2015, we saw them adopting plant-based burgers much more so than other generations. And I think this is more of what we should expect to come in the near future. We did a little economic analysis and examined the financial performance of companies, publicly traded restaurant groups, and showed that moving away from beef, focusing less on beef, and when beef was used, using a higher quality beef, menu diversification, and leading with sustainable options led to higher return on equity, higher stock prices. And of course, you can do this in many different ways. You can still be quick serve, you can be fast casual, and these kind of opportunities we believe are a great opportunity to look at menu diversification today and going forward. Another view from Seattle here. We just wanted to share some of the things that you should expect. You got to prove that you're doing your cleaning. You got to show access. You got to provide fresh and available product, and then packaging and preparation. All of these will be critical. And just a little snippet of Callis's menu. $14 for a veggie melt on par with
Russell, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are very excited to know that you will be back with us on the stage shortly for our second general session with a panel discussion on supply chain disruptions, where we can answer lots more questions and hear more about what you have to say.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Russell. And then I would also like to thank Tom and Michael for joining us earlier. We're now going to the breakout sessions, and you'll be able to choose your breakout session by going to the Sessions tab on the left side of your screen. We know that all of these breakouts look incredible, so you'll be happy to know that we'll be posting recordings of all of these sessions online on our website, so you don't have to miss out by going to just one. Some of these sessions will also have dedicated time for Q&A, so don't be shy and share your green audio and video button to join in on the conversation. Have fun, be inspired, and we will see you back here shortly.